Welcome everyone to today's Friday seminar, Friday's lecture of the Center for Latin American Studies at Stanford. I'm Alberto Diaz-Calleros, the director. Since today will be a Zoom webinar, all attendees are in listen-only mode and only the speakers are able to share their video. The lecture portion of this webinar is being recorded and will be streamed, is being live streamed on our class YouTube page. Those who wish to participate in Q&A should join the webinar, the link to join appeared when you registered or appears when you register, as the Q&A session will not be live streamed. All webinar attendees will be muted throughout the webinar, but you can send your questions to the Q&A button through the webinar, and I will make sure we can discuss those with our guests today. Please note that the post-event recording will actually have the captioning option available, and eventually at some point we hope we're going to start captioning even in more languages as we move forward with these new technologies. Before I introduce our speaker, let me just remind you that we are here at Stanford in the land and the territory of the Ohlone peoples, the original peoples who inhabited this land. We offer our gratitude for the land, for the water, for the air that surrounds us, and we want to pay our respects to the past, to the present, and the future of the Ohlone and the Lenape peoples who continue to be present in their homelands and throughout their diasporas. Please do keep in mind that the COVID pandemic has hit indigenous communities, not just in the United States, but throughout the world disproportionately. So if there are any ways in which you can contribute to your local communities, or at the very least to try to be aware about the kinds of challenges that they're facing today. So today it's really my great pleasure to introduce you to Professor Gretchen Daily, one of our scientists here at Stanford that I have been admiring her work for many years, and now talk to us in our seminar. Her talk is Valuing Nature in Decisions from Demonstration to Transformation. She is the Bing Professor of Environmental Science at Stanford You lost
Hello,
the
I think.
I am so sorry.
Okay, I think I'm back now, or we're both back.
So
Should I go ahead and begin? Or?
I'm sorry, I don't know exactly where I got cut off, but I was introducing our speaker, Gretchen Daily. She has been engaging in policy world with the multilateral development banks, with businesses, with communities, with NGOs. And her Natural Capital project is a global partnership that is integrating the values of nature into planning, policy, finance, and practice globally. It is used by 185 nations throughout the world in this free and open source natural capital data and software platform. She has written hundreds of scientific and popular articles, a dozen books, including Green Growth That Works, Natural Capital Policy and Finance Mechanisms Around the World. And she is also a fellow at the US National Academy of Sciences. Gretchen, thank you so much for being with us.
Alberto, thank you, and thank everyone at the Center for Latin American Studies. I'm so grateful for the chance to meet with you today. And what I'd really like to do is open up, I hope, a conversation on how we might work together more to achieve this vision. So I'll switch to slides, and I hope actually if anyone, I suppose we'll do Q&A at the end, but if anyone has a burning question, you could enter it, and perhaps it could be read off to me. I won't be able to see the chat well while I'm presenting, but oops, I wonder why. Shoot, that's the, let me see, that's the end of the presentation. Here we go. Is that showing up well?
Yes.
Does that show up well? Okay, great. Thank you. So Latin America has been a real leader and promises to continue being a transformative leader, actually, in driving this shift that we all need and are reaching for worldwide, to recognize the values of nature in our decision making, from planning to policy, finance, and day-to-day practice in whatever walk of life we're in. And over the past couple of decades, we've actually gone from many beautiful demonstrations, especially in Latin America, to a point where there's a quite systematic framework, body of knowledge, suite of partnerships, shared understanding and trust, and ever more commitment on the part of key players in this to drive toward transformation. There's also, a lot of risk that this won't, quote, work out. So it's a key moment to think about the role we can each play in joining together and contributing to building momentum and impact. And I hope our conversation can be more about that. So I'm planning to give basically a brief sketch of where things are. And I thought I would err on the side of moving quickly over many things just to give a bigger picture. And then we can dive in specifically on particular interesting topics from the point of view of those participating today. So here we go. I'm going to start in Costa Rica, a country where I've worked for many, many years. Was the poster child of planetary destruction into the 1990s with the highest deforestation rate ever recorded. And things changed dramatically when someone with whom many of us are probably friends, Alvaro Umana, who got his master's at Stanford in economics, his PhD in hydrology at Stanford, together with others and under the government of Oscar Arias, developed and launched this payment system for ecosystem services. It was the first national payment system ever launched in the world, recognizing the value of forest standing and paying people what I would have thought naively initially would be a tiny amount. And the idea was to keep the amount tiny just to develop the program and make sure it actually worked. Actually, at that level of $20 per acre per year, or about $50 per hectare per year, the program was vastly oversubscribed. Landholders holding up their hand and saying they wanted to enroll to conserve or restore forest on their property. And the team who created this program developed a lot of sophistication in it. There were different entities paying in, European countries for climate stability. Those were the first carbon offsets ever brokered in the world. Water purification, that was paid for in part by the National Electricity Company of Costa Rica. About 85-90% of electricity in Costa Rica is delivered through hydropower, which depends on forest for even flow. If we recognize how rain typically falls most heavily in certain times of year and then other times have very little, yet we have electricity needs year-round that are pretty even. And so forest is crucial for capturing water like a sponge and distributing it, releasing it to streams and hydropower facilities, pure, without heavy sedimentation that greatly reduces the livelihood of those investments and facilities, and giving us both relatively clean energy and water security year-round. There are also biodiversity benefits. Most of our prescription drugs trace their origin to natural products, many to tropical places, and actually to indigenous and First Nation people that often discovered the pharmaceutical values that are now exploited by companies and benefit all of us. And then scenic beauty is obviously a huge part of the economy in Costa Rica, attracting tourists within the country and internationally. So this payment system really marked dramatic innovation in the world. And now there are many such payment systems. There are about 550 that operate at a pretty high and sophisticated level worldwide, and that together involve payments of about $40 billion per year. So ever since the late 1990s, around 97, when this was launched, this has become a big deal. And Costa Rica has continued on this path under its current administration, who visited Stanford actually just a couple of years ago, 2019, really leading the world, a small country, but really big ambitions and tremendous inspiration. So I'm going to take us to the beginning, and oh shoot, our pets are getting into a fight. Okay, good. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the conceptual background. Then I'm going to describe the tools that have been created to bring knowledge into action. Along the way, I'm going to give some examples of the science that goes into the tools. We need much, much more kind of interdisciplinary work across many different fields to make these tools more robust. And then I'll end with real-world examples that indicate how far we've come in the pathway toward transformation. So many of you probably know or remember well Ken Arrow, who is a leading figure in the economics department here, and who really helped legitimize the integration of ecology and then more and more of the natural sciences and other disciplines into economics, involving other economists like Partha Dasgupta, who recently released the Dasgupta Review in the UK on the economics of biodiversity, Ouyang Ziyuan in China, who leads the largest unit of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, an ecologist, a panda biologist originally, whose work you'll see here, and Jose Sarucán, who has played many leading roles in heading up UNAM in Mexico, being in the government of President Fox for some years there in the inner cabinet, in heading many international efforts, some based in Mexico like Conavio and some based elsewhere that are truly global. So this is a cast of many characters, but several I wanted to mention just to help illustrate the international partnership going on to drive this vision. So from Costa Rica, from the Knowledge Foundation, first kind of laying it out, starting in the 1990s, then to these real-world pioneering cases popping up. Costa Rica was one with the payment system. Another was New York City with an agreement to help secure the safety and quality of drinking water to the 10 million people living and working in the city, an agreement that involved avoiding an investment in a filtration plant and instead paying and otherwise supporting people like this gentleman on the left in the upper watershed about 100 miles to the north of the city, the Catskills area. The city funded this modern solar heated tent that keeps the cows that he manages in his dairy farm much healthier and thus human health much more secure than the old historic and beautiful barns that used to be used there. The filtration plant would have cost something like $6 to $8 billion, and on economic grounds, expecting to pay roughly $1 to $1.5 billion, the city agreed to this approach, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency supported it. Now, Costa Rica, is 13 modified. There are now about 50 of these watershed agreements in Latin America alone, in the major iconic cities, and more of them springing up all over the world. So with those pioneering cases, just to round out the history, by the mid-2000s, it was clear it was time to systematize more of a universal approach, develop policy mechanisms, financial dimensions thereof, just ways of planning, ways of changing our mindsets and engaging people, especially the land stewards and the stewards of water, whether freshwater or in oceans, to undertake the crucial work of securing and regenerating the biosphere. So that's when at Stanford, and together with partners globally, we launched the Natural Capital Project to help with this. And the project today is a partnership. These are the core partners featured here with the logos in Stockholm at the university and the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, Chinese Academy of Sciences, a fantastic team at the University of Minnesota with very complementary expertise. These two main conservation NGOs, and then many research and implementing partners around the world, more and more involved with the development banks. So you'll see that in the examples. And the idea here, to which I hope more and more of us can be contributing, is to advance engaged science, technology, and decisions to promote stewardship and well-being. And the science was really focused on answering three questions that many decision makers in many sectors or walks of life face in this context. One is, where and how much nature to protect. So you see in the image on the left, a pretty stark set of choices there in that big landscape. But anywhere we are, whether in a densely populated city or out in vast rural lands or even wild lands, as much as they remain in the world today, we have that question, how much and where should we protect, and how do we decide? Second, how can we align that pursuit of sustainability and protecting of nature with livelihoods, with security, with respectful ways of living? And third, how can we track progress? How can we measure this and report it at the core levels in decision making, whether in governments or in companies or communities? So that's what we'll dive into now. And I'm planning to go quite quickly over some things and hope that that's okay, just to get the idea across. So here we have this structure and really open arms, welcoming ever more participation and driving the understanding. You'll see there's so many questions that remain to be understood, implementing the understanding and tools that make the knowledge we house in our research institutions accessible and actionable by people all over, showing the power of these tools and approaches in real demonstrations, and then making all of this accessible on our platform that constitutes many elements for communicating, as well as just promoting specific advances in decision making. So here's sort of the framework. It comes kind of from economics initially, where we're trying to confront the cost-benefit analysis that underlies so much of decision making around planning and policy and investing and affecting our well-being. So the idea is just to consider, as an example of many possible examples, a shift to green agriculture on the left. With that change in management and policy, you would have a change in ecosystem structure. You'd have more streamside habitat in particular places in farmland. This would lead to a change in the functioning of the ecosystem with hopefully improved water filtration, retention of nutrients and other pollutants that we don't want to be drinking that cause disease, and also helping to prevent flooding and other things. That change results in changes in services or benefits to people, visible and reduced, loads of these pollutants in streams, improvement of agricultural yield because you're not losing all the nutrients and soil into the water, and improved outcomes for people. So this is kind of the overall framework. And now I'll just show you some of the science that goes into it, and then I'll just give you two very contrasting examples. Then we'll look at the tools and then some demonstrations. So I want to give, first of all, a view to rural landscapes and livelihoods, where all of us, all of our well-being, however urban we might be or modern we might be in our lives today, all of our well-being really traces to what goes on in rural landscapes and to the biodiversity there. These are shots from Costa Rica, the royal flycatcher, male and female, that eat a lot of the insects. And then this is the largest bat in the Americas. And this bat goes around eating those birds and other things at night. And this is in coffee, you can see a project we're running. That's a coffee plant right there. A silky anteater, all sorts of wildlife. And here, over many years, about 25 years, we've been measuring how much of this wildlife can be sustained in human-managed landscapes. And we've come to a pretty inspiring view that while on the one hand, plants really are, most of the plant diversity is restricted to forest. If we maintain enough plant diversity, we can support these other things, the non-flying mammals, the bats, the birds, reptiles, and amphibians. Most have most of their diversity in both forest and in the crop fields and pasture. So that gives us hope that this machinery of nature could be sustained while we also sustain livelihoods. In a summary of about 20 years of this work across Costa Rica and these regions, we've measured bird diversity as it's like taking a blood sample, one way of measuring health of an ecosystem in the very diverse rainforest, in the more diversified farming systems that involve production of crops below and then an overstory often of some trees, and then in the very intensified monocultures. Just one result from this work, to go quickly, is to show you that amazingly, while the intensive agriculture has really declined in a key measure of bird diversity and community kind of health over time, the diversified agriculture has remained about the same as the forest over all these years and is buffered from both land use intensification and climate change. And so there's more and more looking toward older traditional forms of agriculture and how to bring those into modern production practices to provide much greater benefits both to nature and to people. But why should we do this? What are the values of biodiversity in the countryside, and who would really benefit and how? I'm just going to show you an example. If you woke up today, I wonder how many of you had coffee to kick off the day and maybe even a cup at lunchtime. So these landscapes shown here produce coffee, among other things, and this is the flower of the coffee. Amazingly, guess how much coffee blooms? It's only 1 week in the year, and then it needs countless bees to come and pollinate the coffee. Even though coffee, the modern varieties, are self-pollinated, you get much higher yield and higher quality, we found, by having native bee pollinators that live in the landscape. So here in a study asking whether these forest pollinators that live, the bees need nectar and pollen every day. The coffee provides it only 1 week of the whole year. So that means the bees need some place to live with nectar and pollen, and that's in rainforests in tropical countries. So we measured over many months. It takes 9 months for coffee beans to mature after the flower has been pollinated. We measured at different distances from forest out into farmland in these different sort of experimental plots, the contribution of forest to yield and farm profit. And we found that near forest coffee plants have much more diverse bees, more pollination, and higher yields. They also have higher quality. At the time when we did the study, nobody was really separating different qualities of bean, or very few producers. Now they are more and more. So a lower bound value of this rainforest to these farms here was this one big farm here was $60,000 per year. And that was about 8% of the farm income, and a significant boost that, is essential for profitability of the system. And since that time, there have been tons of studies showing the same effect of an improvement in yield and in quality of various agricultural products on which we all depend. And then same for, you might look at birds and bats. What good do they do? One of many things they do is control pests. So in another intensive study that took a couple of years, we measured exactly how many pests different birds and bats consume, mostly insect pests. And we found that birds play a key role in reducing infestation by La Broca, the coffee berry borer. That's tremendous. It saves us from the effects of overusing chemical pesticides, and there's not even an effective pesticide for this coffee crop and this pest. Bats were way more complex. So for any nature lovers or ecologists on the line now, there's a lot more to do. They eat both the friendly, beneficial, as well as the harmful insects. So basically, there have been tons of studies like this. I'm going to show another quick one before answering the question, how to move from studies to policy and finance. This quick one, it'll be a jarring change. We've just been in the beauty of the rural landscapes, and now we're diving into the world's mega cities. So you all know, we started out with maybe 3% of humanity in cities back in 1800. Now we're at about 55% globally. In California, we're at 95% in cities. And in the pandemic, all of us in cities are really feeling the stress of not having much access to nature. And in fact, well before the pandemic, it was shown that living in cities is associated with a much higher rate of anxiety and mood disorders relating to depression and other things. And so that has led to a lot of work on this. It was on the cover of The Economist some years back, a leading group showing that our brains actually function quite differently depending on where we've grown up and also on where we live presently. And so we ran an experiment at Stanford. I'll just show you quickly. You guys who know the university know this is this psychology department in one of the main buildings of the quad. Here's a free shuttle bus. And we had people who volunteered for the study, all of whom were urban people. We randomly assigned them either to walk along this major street, El Camino, hardly a megacity street. There's trees and so on, and you can even hear birds along there, but it's a busy street, about 8 lanes on both sides. Or the other half got to walk in this more natural area over toward the dish. So everything was controlled. They took some tests when they arrived. They took a shuttle. They went on a walk, 50 minutes, 50. A 50-minute walk. Yeah, thank you. Whoever's typing is doing an incredible job here. And then they took some more tests. And here's the deal. I couldn't believe it. I thought it would be really hard to measure the impact of that little dose of nature on mental health. I was worried my student who led all the work, Greg Bratman, that he would be in school for 100 years. But he found incredibly dramatic results. And here's how one of the tests worked. This one measures how well your working memory is doing. So you have to answer this kind of question really quickly. 4 divided by 2 plus 1, does that equal 4? True or false? False is the answer. And then while you're concentrating on this, you have to remember a letter. True or false? Remember the letter. True or false? Letter. True or false? Letter. And then you've got to report back the sequence of letters that you saw. And this game can go on for a long time. It's just to see how well you can concentrate. You have to get the math problems mostly correct. You know, you can't just cheat and focus on the letters, which is what I felt like doing. And we found that the people who walked in that little bit of nature remembered way more letters. This is the difference in letters remembered before and after. So luckily, we did not hurt the urban walking people. They didn't leave our study worse off, but they didn't get any better off either. This is the difference before and after the walk. But those that got to go walk in that little nature area for 50 minutes, their working memory was going way better. And this has been shown in many studies now. So if you have an exam coming up or a big work-related event or anything like that, a walk can do you really good. Other kinds of tests, we ask people a lot about themselves, and I'm going to move kind of quickly here just to report how much they're ruminating. This is the sort of thing I find myself doing too often, of just having repetitive sort of negative thoughts about dumb things I've done in life in the past or whatever, little regrets. That's called rumination in psychology. And you can see that people who got to walk in nature, they really lowered their rumination. They all started out the same, I should have mentioned, but they really stopped, thinking back over embarrassing or disappointing moments. Compared to here again, luckily, statistically, we did not hurt the urban people, but they were ruminating before and they were still ruminating after. And then in a third part of this study, we put people in that brain scanner down there, and this part of the experiment was really expensive, so we made them walk longer just to make sure we'd get a result. They had to walk for 90 minutes, 90. And here too, the walk led to basically a real reduction, that green bar, a reduction in the blood flow to the parts of the brain that are associated. This subgenual prefrontal cortex is associated with the onset of both rumination, and then it's a risk factor for depression. And if you go out in nature, you ruminate less and you have less blood flow to that part of the brain. So more and more the trends that we see in cities seem to be causally linked. The trends of A, more people living in cities, B, more of us leading sedentary lives, ever more on screens rather than interacting with reality directly. And third, we're ever more disconnected from nature. So these trends, when it comes to human health, and there are actually many other dimensions of health we've been looking at, seem to be causally related, where nature experience really can boost working memory and mood and reduce anxiety and rumination. So now there haven't been as many studies in this area, but the area is really starting to explode with interest. And now I'm going to turn to this question. So I'm going to show you our tools briefly. And what we decided to do is to try to make accessible all this information that comes into academic arenas, but it's hard to get it out to the world. So we've put into this set of software models a way of estimating basically the values of nature and even the return on investment in more nature, say in cities, to achieve urban cooling, for example, putting more trees in cities. It will cost something. Land is very precious in densely populated cities, but it'll bring about a lot of benefit, maybe savings in energy use, improvements in health. In the health arena, we're adding more models. Just in the US alone, lack of physical activity costs over $130 billion per year. And adding a few trees and walkable areas in cities can attract many people to it, especially if there's good accessible transportation, and greatly reduce those health costs. Similarly, coastal protection, there's a whole suite, and these models are now used all over the world. And we're just starting to get the data at a fine resolution to bring the models into cities. And what I'd like to tell you about is how we do all this. Now I'm going to jump to a few demonstrations. So we work very much in a co-development process where we engage with decision makers at every level, the communities that would be affected in, the focus is on making cities more livable, sustainable, and equitable, then we'll meet with all the relevant communities to understand what the number one problems are from their points of view. And then we bring researchers together, like in this big group here, mixed. There's maybe 40% researchers and probably 60% people, decision makers at all these levels, gathering to inform the development of this work. And then I'll just show you a few examples. In Latin America, it's incredible to see that New York case just taking off. I call it the New York case because that was a modern case that did inspire a lot of people. But of course, managing water for downstream users goes back to the beginnings of time of people competing for water. So it's hardly a Western or a modern concept. It's an ancient one. But all these downstream users depend on water. This is shown in Colombia, in cities, and the pictures are from different places, but in big agricultural areas, drinking water in cities and in different communities, hydropower. And it comes from places often hundreds of kilometers away in the uplands, Quechua-speaking people, a world apart culturally as well as in terms of policy and engagement. So the idea is to start investing in the livelihoods and places up here, answering those questions, where and how much to protect, to secure water for downstream beneficiaries, while meaningfully improving the livelihoods and involvement of upstream people. And it makes us answer questions like, well, which activities would be most helpful? Is it forest conservation or restoration of forests, or better management practices like fencing and maybe adding more trees to grazing lands? And where in the vast millions of square kilometers would we be making these investments to secure downstream places? And here in the case of the Cauca Valley, there are now several of these water funds, fondos del agua. And here for this one city, you can see this is the watershed. That's defined as the area where any drop of rain that lands anywhere here will naturally, by gravity, flow down to the city and beyond. And this is what that watershed looks like on its side. So we can see it. This is the top, the ridge line. You know, these are the roads and the valley. And then this is the ridge line in the mountains. So what Invest shows you is a portfolio, the software of where you would invest in protection, reforestation in some of these places, depending, on where the cows and other impacts are, adding trees to pasture, fencing, and enriching the understory plants. These are places where in dairy and grazing practices, animals are concentrated, so there's a higher chance of having disease like Giardia or Cryptosporidium go into the waterway, so to protect the city. And you can quantify actually like the return on investment of different portfolios on different parcels of land at different budget levels to achieve a certain improvement in water quality. And this is now being taken up. It's actually 55, just in the last couple of months, 55 major water funds are taking up this standardized approach only in Latin America. And then many more are starting to be taken up in Asia and Africa. And the circles show where and the different stages of development of the funds. And much of the seed funding and help is coming from the Inter-American Development Bank. And then here's Luis Alberto Moreno, who used to run it and stepped down recently. Rios is one of our software packages customized for this kind of decision making. So that's an example. Another quick one is hugely important one, looking at coastal climate resilience in Latin America and the Caribbean with these tragic hurricanes coming in with greater force and frequency under climate change. And you can use the software to visualize where, here in the case of the Bahamas, you would invest, where the hazard is highest, people exposed. And you can see, like this is that same island right here. You know, we can bring it in to software, have it on someone's computer screen, track it with satellite images through time, the change, hopefully improvements in securing and reducing risk in the face of hurricanes that go over those islands almost every year, and motivating policy and finance. We did the same in Belize, where this is the country, and these colorful areas are the zones offshore, looking at many different activities of offshore oil and gas drilling, fishing, cruise ships, tourism. There's nearshore fishing. There's a lot of snorkeling and recreation. And then onshore agriculture, of course, and infrastructure development, and then more upland forest areas. And we developed a plan with the country of both in Barbados and also in Belize that involved, you know, seeing the mangrove and the coral reef as really underpinning the benefits of coastal protection from climate change, fishing and tourism industries, and much more, leading to well-being. And I won't go through it all. We mapped it all out in several years of community processes. And then this woman on the right, Chantal Clark Samuels, who was CEO of the process and this management authority, presented the plan together with, she's a Stanford person, Katie Arkema, who's expert in all the science. And together they got financing from IDB, and now this is being scaled across 26 member countries. So that gives an idea of what's going on in Latin America, and I'll close in just a couple minutes. What I want to close with is a view just to one other place, China, to see how far things are going and how much interconnection there can be in developing the learning and the process. And I'm going to skip ahead a bit. China has developed a whole vision for developing an ecological civilization. It added ecological to its 5 pillars, the 5th pillar, just a couple years ago for the Constitution. And they've implemented incredible, assessments of all their ecosystems in incredible detail. We're trying to do that from here and working with institutions, all the partner institutions in countries worldwide, making this accessible. But China went all out, looking at where their ecosystems are. This is a high-level summary, ton of detail on whether they're degrading or improving and how that's affecting human well-being. mapping out, the key places, the critical natural capital for all these benefits, and then bringing it into, I have too many things here, but there's zoning land. So 50% of land is zoned in China for ecosystem benefits. And I'm bringing this up because many countries in Latin America now want to do this. And recently, I'm going to get to this biggest innovation. They're paying 200 million people to restore ecosystems, doing this in cities. And here's the innovation. They've developed, together with many of us, a new metric called GEP, Gross Ecosystem Product. And we developed it together with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Definitely an idea that came from China after waiting many years for Europe to green GDP. But given that nobody's really going to modify GDP, they said, okay, let's put forth another metric. And so just like GDP, it takes all the goods and services of a place and quantifies the amount produced and multiplies by the price or value. And so we do that not for all benefits from nature to people. We don't even know what many of them are, but we do it for at least an initial set. And we're trying to get various health benefits in here soon into the software. And that allows, basically, with all that tracking and monitoring of what's going on in China up here in ecosystems, brings in data on natural capital assets. And then you can look at the flow of benefits using this software that we've created with people globally to measure the contribution of ecosystems to the economy and society, and to inform this financial compensation to the 200 million people now in China. And they want to make this ever more a core part, involving more and more of the private sector of the financial system in China and globally. And then this is also a way for tracking performance of policies, leaders meant to implement them, and investments. So this has attracted the attention of many people because it was just certified by the UN Statistical Commission for global use. And that's where Colombia is now the first country that we're engaging with to deploy a similar approach. So I'm going to stop there. This I had an example of how this is being deployed in China, but I just want to, sorry I've gone on a bit too long, but I'd love to open up to some questions now and then follow up with people later. And I thank you very much for your patience and attention, and look forward to talking together. Thank you.
No, thank you, Gretchen. Thank you very much. I think we have just listened to an incredible integration from Gretchen Daily of so many aspects that are beyond the science into the policy world, into the finance, into the international cooperation, as well as our own mental health. So thank you so much for this. We will now go into the Q&A session. I am not sure if the live stream has been stopped, but